is going to sound insane to some people, but I swear it's not affected, I'm not making it up, I'm being 100% deadly serious when I tell you that Assassin's Creed is really important to me. It's one of those things for me where, you know, it's not just that you love it, it's that loving it is almost foundational to you. It's part of your story. It's like loving a football team or Star Trek or being Welsh. Only two of those apply to me.
I've spoken to a few people now who can remember where they were and what they were doing when they saw Assassin's Creed for the first time. I chatted to my wife about it a while back and she told me the story about how she just happened to walk past her brother's bedroom when he was playing it. Hadn't seen anything like it before. A video game that had this distinct sort of mid-2000s J.J. Abrams glossy TV show look about it and was so viscerally and intricately historical she found herself just standing there and watching it. And then their dad walked past and did the exact same thing. I mean, I'd hate to be the brother in that situation. What are you doing? Get the f*** out of my room. I remember working in a call centre the day after the trailer dropped. That first E3 trailer in Accra with the eagle and a hooded figure making a kill before disappearing into the crowd. I'd been massively out of touch with gaming news at that point because I was happy enough just endlessly playing Morrowind on a rubbish PC back home, but I found myself part of a wee crowd of 20-somethings gathered around someone's monitor. No work was getting done, obviously, and I distinctly remember one of the guys going, "Oh man, this is pure next gen, like." Which, in fairness to him, he was right. Wonder how that guy's doing, actually. I mean, he's from Dunfermline, he's probably dead. And like I said, it was at a time in my life where I hadn't really kept up with gaming, and I remember really clearly making a decision, right, I'm gonna get a 360, I'm gonna play this game because it looks amazing. And that was a really significant thing for me because I didn't have any money. I saved up for a while, got a 360, got Assassin's Creed, and it was pretty much the only game I had for the system for a while, so I played it to death, and I just absolutely fell in love with it, and I've been in love with it ever since.
The point is that every now and then something comes along and becomes this cultural juggernaut that seems to in some way set the blueprint for everything that comes after it, that leaves traces of itself in the numerous works it inspires for years afterwards, whether that's because it's full of good ideas that get nicked and remixed ad infinitum, or because it gets so drearily popular that creators relish the idea of veering wildly away from it. Assassin's Creed is one of those things. It's gaming's equivalent of something like Lost or Game of Thrones, where yes, they're deeply flawed and there's always someone who sneers at them whenever they come up in conversation, but even that person can't deny the sheer impact they've had on the media landscape, the amount of copycats they inspired, the tropes they established, the careers they launched.
I would say though that I don't think Assassin's Creed, as bad as it has gotten sometimes, has ever shat the bed as much as Lost or Game of Thrones did by the end, which means the pressure on the AC Shadows team not to skid the whole thing into a bin must be immense. I can't imagine what that's like. It's no wonder it's been delayed, actually. If I was making that, even if it got to the point where it was perfect, I'd still be checking everything, like when your OCD kicks in and you've got to check all the windows and doors like 3 times before you leave the house. And I do think it's important on a cultural level that they get it right because Assassin's Creed is important. Assassin's Creed is part of a grand lineage of historically inspired action-adventure games that goes all the way back to Prince of Persia on the Apple II. Indeed, Assassin's Creed started life as a spin-off of that series. You can see elements of it surviving to this day. Rotoscoped fencing was 1989's cutting-edge equivalent of today's performance-captured combat system. You can quite easily argue that Assassin's Creed takes a lot of inspiration from Tomb Raider as well, as does anything that involves a lot of climbing walls, exploring old ruins, and early discriminate murder. Assassin's Creed wears its influences on its sleeve. There's no denying how derivative it is. It's an open-world Prince of Persia game with Tomb Raider's traversal, Medal of Honor's historical realism, Hitman's hide-in-plain-sight stealth system, the convoluted deep lore cinematic presentation and twisting meta-narrative of Metal Gear Solid. If you look at the state of play in 2007, Assassin's Creed was essentially video games the video game. It's even got a bit of Grand Theft Auto in there. But like all the best things in life, whether they're video games, films, TV shows, novels, albums, countries, Assassin's Creed is so much more than the sum of its parts, and it is, for my money, the birth of the modern AAA video game. Sometimes it feels like everything is an Assassin's Creed derivative now, from Lord of the Rings to Spider-Man. The Ubisoft template of open-world action game has become, for better or worse, ubiquitous.
It's even bled back into Tomb Raider and the sorts of action-adventure games that used to be entirely linear, but now have loads of wide open areas to explore and to do side stuff in. And it starts right here with the first Assassin's Creed, climbing towers to defog the map and unlock side activities that advance your progress and character abilities, investigative gameplay that relies on some kind of sixth sense, whether through supernatural means or a Batman-style detective mode. There's even something Assassin's Creedy about the entire AAA look now, a sort of softly lit naturalism with an emphasis on intricate detail that stays just on the larger-than-life side of the uncanny valley, enough for it to remain unmistakably a video game. It never looks weird, even if you're fighting a giant mythical wolf or you've just triggered a mad physics bug. And yet, it's real enough for you to have no trouble empathizing with the characters. I mean, maybe I'm doing a bit of boss baby here and just projecting Assassin's Creed into everything. Maybe it's that the Ubisoft catalogue and Sony's first-party output account for a massive percentage of the AAA space, and they're basically all the same game. But what I'm getting at is that it does feel like there was a time before Assassin's Creed, and then a time after. In the same way that there was a time before The Witcher 3 and then a time after. The Witcher 3 is another example of a seminal game that seemed to just leave its mark on everything that came after it, including, as it happens, Assassin's Creed, which, as we all know, reinvented itself as a Witcher 3 style RPG a few years back and just seems to have kept ballooning ever since. It's all part of the same cycle of reinvention and reinterpretation, and outright theft, which, if you love the medium of video games and find it fascinating on an academic level, at the risk of sounding pretentious, the first Assassin's Creed game is so interesting because it's full of mad contradictions. It spawned a flagship series that is one of the best-selling video game franchises of all time. The amount of money it's made is obscene, and yet everyone thinks the first game is a load of shit. It's slow, it's boring, the parkour's really irritating, the combat's too easy, the writing is a load of vague quasi-philosophical guff about the illusion of free will.
It must be knowledge that frees them, not force.
They do not learn, fixed in their ways as they are.
The accepted wisdom, and it's accepted because it's correct, is that Assassin's Creed was a disappointing game that had a load of brilliant sequels. Quite a lot of sequels as well, but let's not muddy the narrative. It's true that the first game feels very unrefined compared to later games in the series. Altair is often quite unwieldy as a character and never quite goes where you want him to. There's an emphasis on repetitive activities, eavesdropping, pickpocketing, flag collecting, saving the citizen, etc. The systems often clash in unpredictable ways. You're trying to tail someone in order to beat some information out of them, but there's a beggar who won't leave you alone, and unlike the sequel, there's no mechanism for giving them money, so in addition to being frustrated, you also just feel bad.
But putting all that aside, what's remarkable about playing the first game now in 2024, the best part of 2 decades, and Christ knows how many sequels, spin-offs, comics, tie-in novels, short films and long films later, is how fully formed Assassin's Creed was when it arrived.
Even when you compare it to the latest games, it is unmistakably the same thing. People often forget that the first game had a vast kingdom map where you could explore on horseback a landscape that was pockmarked with peasant villages and Roman ruins. Sounds familiar. It's not a full-fat RPG like the most recent games, but it is a game where you unlock new equipment over time and can increase your character's hit points or sync bar by performing extracurricular activities. The supernatural elements of the story, which a lot of people misremember as coming later, are set up in this game. There's a very clear line from Apples of Eden to battering Cyclopses. It might not be as in-depth, it might not be as refined, but the basic framework of an Assassin's Creed game is all there, present and correct. Every game since has been a remix of elements that were always here. Yes, even the pirate ship you get in Black Flag is basically an elaborate combination of horse and bureau. So the first game doesn't get enough credit for establishing the strong foundation that its much more celebrated sequel, Assassin's Creed 2, was able to build on so successfully. It seems like such an obvious thing to say, and yet I feel like people do forget that there is no Assassin's Creed 2 without Assassin's Creed. There is no Ezio, there is no Black Flag, there is no Cassandra, there is no lavish recreation of classical Greece, Ptolemaic Egypt, or revolutionary Paris. It's fundamental. Altair walked so Ivor could freerun. Most of the other games have an element of rebuilding the Assassin's Brotherhood after they've been all but wiped out, but the first game is fairly unique in that it depicts the Assassins at the absolute height of their power, at a time when they still had regional offices in every major city and their headquarters was a gigantic mountain fortress in Syria, Masyaf Castle, which is a real place which really was home to the Assassin's Brotherhood, an Islamic sect who lived in the mountains and played a prominent role in the Crusades, as did their leader, the Old Man of the Mountain, who is depicted in Assassin's Creed as Altair's mentor, Al-Mualim. And this is a good place to mention the other thing that the first game doesn't get anywhere near enough credit for, namely the fact that its protagonist isn't a wisecracking white guy or a big buff white guy or a white woman. Altair is from the Middle East and he's canonically a Muslim. Some of his dialogue suggests that his religious faith might have lapsed, and let's be clear about this, Assassin's Creed makes a very conspicuous, you might say cowardly choice not to actually talk about the religious element of the Crusades, which is a bit like not talking about the petroleum element of an internal combustion engine. Regardless, having an Arabic, heavily implied to be Muslim man be the hero of a AAA video game in 2007 was, I think, a brave choice at a time when, I probably don't need to remind you all, Islamophobia was shamefully rife in the West. And it still is. And it really shouldn't be brave or notable to make your main character a Middle Eastern man. But I do think it's an important thing to remember in the context of the time. Now, obviously, Assassin's Creed depicts a heavily fictionalized version of the Crusades, and as mentioned, doesn't really go into the central conflict, preferring instead to relegate the Holy War to a sort of backdrop to the ideological conflict between Assassins and Templars that characterizes the series to this day. Kind of, I mean, knows what the last game's even about, if I'm being honest. Even so, the main draw of the series is its sense of historical realism. History is our playground, so goes the marketing slogan, and it's a brilliant one because it really distills Assassin's Creed down to a single sentence elevator pitch that describes its entire appeal. I didn't really pay much attention to history before I played Assassin's Creed, but I distinctly remember googling the fortress at Masyaf to see if it was real or made up, and upon discovering it was real, it dawned on me that history is fascinating. I mean, yeah, it's fun to run around stabbing people in a dramatized simulation of it, but Assassin's Creed's commitment to featuring painstakingly researched historical realism as a hyper-detailed backdrop to its ongoing story about goodies and baddies fighting across time is something that I credit with enriching my life. It made me realise that I love learning about the past, and I'm not the smartest person in the room, and I've got a memory, so don't get me wrong, I'd never describe myself as an amateur historian or anything so twee, but what I do know is that since getting into Assassin's Creed, I've inhaled loads of books written by academics, podcasts, documentaries, you name it. I've even discovered something about myself in that I have a favourite period of history to read about, and it is precisely the bit where the Romans checked out of Britain and civilization collapsed because the Brits just couldn't hack it without Continentals running things for them, and I find that idea endlessly captivating and, if I'm being honest, quite funny. So, as an aside, when Valhalla came out and it was set 400 years after the Romans left Britain and the land was pockmarked with a load of Roman ruins depicting the 9th century as a sort of post-apocalyptic vision of the Dark Ages, which it probably was, I felt like they'd made that for me. And I guess that's the power of a really strong idea, a solid foundation on which to build a cultural artwork. People feel like they own it. People feel like it's worth investing their time, money, and emotional labour into it because the rewards can be so profound and go way beyond the thing itself. Assassin's Creed has given me a lot. You wouldn't believe it. Hundreds of hours of entertainment, yes, but also lifelong friendships, hey Louise, interests that I never knew I had, and subsequently, I hope, a much more informed understanding of the world than I would have had otherwise. I wouldn't have a career if it wasn't for Assassin's Creed. If I didn't save up for that 360 all those years ago and start a podcast with my mate Richie, I wouldn't be sitting here saying this into a microphone and paying my mortgage with it.
And I think now is an amazing time to revisit the first game, not just because it happens to run at 4K 60 on Xbox Series X, where it looks absolutely banging by the way, and is for me now the definitive version of the game, but because with Assassin's Creed Mirage serving as a prequel to both the last mainline game and the first, and being set in a Middle Eastern region adjacent to the original, The whole saga has sort of come full circle and currently stands as this coherent whole that can be enjoyed as one big story. And with next year's Assassin's Creed Shadows moving the action to a completely new part of the world and serving as a semi-reboot of the modern day story, it feels like the next one will be a springboard for a whole new saga and a whole new set of reasons to cut about stabbing people like a Paisley debt collector. That's a rubbish simile to end it on, but that is the end, because I don't know how to finish these things properly. Like and subscribe.